Get silent, Grandpa. I'll speak.
I was sitting on the floor of my empty studio apartment staring at the final divorce papers when my ex-wife Sarah sent me a message that made every muscle in my body tense with rage. It was 4:15 p.m. on a Thursday, exactly 90 minutes after Judge Harrison's gavel officially ended our 23-year marriage. The first text read, "Hope you enjoy your pathetic new place, David. Brandon just had his grand piano delivered to your old studio. The insurance valuation came back at more than you earn in 7 years. Oh, and we're converting your practice room into a Scotch library for someone who actually matters in this world." Then came the photo. Brandon Fletcher standing in what used to be my home office, his Princeton MBA diploma hanging exactly where my grandfather Henry's military commendations used to be displayed on the wall, wearing that self-satisfied expression I'd grown to despise over the past year. "You'll die broke and forgotten," the next message said. "Just like your grandfather wasting away in that state facility. At least he had his precious secrets to comfort him. What do you have? A violin and fantasies of talent." My arm was already drawn back to throw the phone against the wall when it suddenly rang. Not a text this time, but an actual call. The caller ID displayed nothing but a string of zeros with a single one at the end. I stared at the screen through 5 rings, then 6, then 7. On the 8th ring, my thumb moved almost involuntarily and answered. David Henry Miller. The voice was male, military, precise. Each syllable enunciated like ammunition being loaded into a chamber. "Who is this?" My voice came out rougher than I intended, thick with all the emotions I'd been suppressing throughout the day. "Mr. Miller, this is Captain Thomas Harrison from the Pentagon's Classified Recovery Operations Division. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Your grandfather, Staff Sergeant Henry Miller, completed a classified military operation in Cambodia in 1962. That operation was designated Midnight Echo. Everything I'm about to tell you has been classified beyond top secret for exactly 60 years. As of yesterday midnight, that classification officially expired. My grandfather was a logistics coordinator in Vietnam. He played trumpet in officers' clubs. That's the story my father William had told me my entire life, the same story he'd heard from Henry himself. That was his operational cover, Mr. Miller. Your grandfather was actually a cryptographic intelligence specialist with the 9th Special Operations Group. The mission he completed has significant financial implications. He recovered certain materials that have accrued considerable monetary value over the past 6 decades. That compensation, with compounded interest calculated according to Department of Defense protocols, is now worth approximately $156 million. The phone slipped from my trembling hand and clattered against the hardwood floor. I could hear Captain Harrison's voice continuing, distant and tinny. I grabbed the phone quickly, my hands shaking uncontrollably. "That's impossible. My grandfather died completely broke. My parents had to take out a second mortgage on their house just to cover his nursing home expenses for the last 2 years of his life." Staff Sergeant Miller made a deliberate choice, Mr. Miller. He chose silence to protect classified information and to keep his family safe. But he also made very specific provisions for the future. The compensation funds can only be released to his direct male descendant and only if certain predetermined conditions are met. You need to come to Washington, D.C. immediately. A United Airlines ticket has been purchased in your name for the flight departing O'Hare International Airport in exactly 3 hours. First class, window seat 9A. Your grandfather specifically requested that particular detail in his sealed documentation. How did you even know to call me today, right after my divorce was finalized? There was a meaningful pause on the other end of the line. Your grandfather's instructions were extraordinarily specific, Mr. Miller. We were explicitly directed to contact you on the exact day you lost everything material in your life. His precise words, written in his own handwriting in 1979, were, "When my grandson has absolutely nothing left to lose, give him everything I couldn't claim." He's been dead for 31 years. How could he possibly have known this would happen today? Henry Miller understood behavioral patterns, Mr. Miller. It's what made him invaluable to military intelligence operations. The question right now is whether you're prepared to learn what he knew and what he left for you. You have exactly 72 hours from the moment I made this call to complete what your grandfather started, or the entire inheritance automatically transfers to the Department of Defense General Fund. Through my apartment window, I could see Lake Michigan stretching out gray and turbulent, exactly like my grandfather's eyes when he'd stare into the distance, lost in memories he refused to share with anyone. "Captain Harrison, What exactly did my grandfather recover in that jungle? The answer to that specific question is worth $156 million, Mr. Miller. I'll see you at the Pentagon tomorrow morning, 800 hours sharp. Bring your grandfather's leather notebook, the one filled with the musical transcriptions and compositions. You still have it, don't you? I looked across the room at the single cardboard box I'd absolutely refused to let Sarah touch during the entire divorce process. The one labeled Grandpa Henry's belongings in my mother Elizabeth's careful handwriting. Yes, I still have it. Excellent. One final thing before we disconnect, Mr. Miller. Your ex-wife's new companion, Brandon Fletcher. His grandfather, Richard Fletcher, was a military defense contractor in 1962. This is not coincidence. Absolutely nothing about your current situation is coincidence. Your grandfather anticipated all of this decades ago. The line went dead before I could respond. 3 months before that phone call changed my entire existence, I stood on the stage at Orchestra Hall performing the final notes of Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto. The audience erupted in sustained applause. 1,800 people rose to their feet, and in the fourth row center, Sarah sat with her hands motionless in her lap, not clapping. That should have been my first real warning that something fundamental had shifted. Life at 45 had settled into a rhythm as predictable and comfortable as a metronome. Every morning I'd wake at 6 in our Evanston home, practice scales and technical exercises in my soundproof studio, while Sarah did yoga on the terrace overlooking our pool. The house sprawled across 2.5 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, each room a testament to Sarah's impeccable eye for interior design and my ability to fund her increasingly expensive taste. We'd purchased the property 16 years ago when the Chicago Philharmonic promoted me to principal first chair violin, back when Sarah still attended every single one of my performances and genuinely meant it when she said she loved watching my fingers move across the strings with such precision. Your grandfather Henry would be so incredibly proud, my mother Elizabeth had said at our elaborate housewarming party, running her work-worn hands along the imported marble countertops. Henry always said music would take you places he never could go himself. Grandpa Henry had been dead for 14 years by that point, but his presence still lingered in our family like a melody you can't quite identify but somehow recognize. My father, William, kept Henry's photograph prominently displayed on the living room mantel, a black and white military portrait of a sharp-eyed young man in dress uniform. Next to it sat Henry's Bronze Star Medal, though none of us actually knew what specific actions he'd performed to earn it. He came back from Vietnam fundamentally different, William would say after his third whiskey at family gatherings. Spent 9 months in Cambodia before his official deployment to Vietnam even started. Never talked about any of it. Just played that trumpet like he was trying to drown out sounds only he could hear. I'd inherited Henry's natural musical gift, but channeled it through completely different avenues, where he played improvised jazz in smoky nightclubs, fingers flying over trumpet valves with spontaneous genius. I chose the highly disciplined world of classical orchestral music. Structure, precision, every single note written down and predetermined, safe and controlled. Sarah had loved that quality about me when we first met at a charity fundraiser 24 years ago. "You're nothing like these other men," she'd whispered that first night, her breath warm against my ear as we danced slowly. "These investment banker types who think money equals culture. You create something that actually matters, something eternal." She was working for a small boutique interior design firm back then, hungry and fiercely ambitious, wearing a borrowed evening gown and costume jewelry that I found endearing rather than pretentious. I was 31, she was 28, and when she looked at me with those intense green eyes, I felt like Paganini himself. Our marriage had been genuinely good for the first dozen years. She redesigned our various apartments and condos as my career steadily advanced, each living space more sophisticated and expensive than the previous one. When we finally purchased the Evanston house, she quit working entirely, explaining that she wanted to focus completely on making our life beautiful and perfect. I practiced religiously 6 hours every single day, performed 3 or 4 nights each week, taught advanced master classes twice weekly at Northwestern University. On weekends, we discussed having children, but somehow never quite got around to actually starting a family. Always one more international tour, one more major renovation project, one more something indefinable keeping us from that particular composition. The change in our relationship started gradually, almost imperceptibly, like a violin slowly going out of tune by microtones. Sarah joined the exclusive country club, started having regular lunches with women whose husbands operated hedge funds and technology companies. She'd return home talking constantly about vacation properties in Aspen, luxury yachts on Lake Geneva, private jets to international art fairs. Did you hear that Brandon Fletcher just purchased an original Warhol for $28 million? She mentioned one evening, not bothering to look up from her phone. Can you even imagine having that kind of money? Brandon Fletcher, the name that would eventually destroy everything I'd built. He'd hired Sarah to completely redesign his downtown penthouse, a massive project she accepted without discussing it with me first. It's just one lucrative project, she'd said dismissively when I questioned it. His money spends exactly the same as anyone else's. But it really didn't. His money came wrapped in constant attention, lavish compliments, and implied comparisons that left me feeling progressively smaller and more inadequate with each passing week. Brandon was 6'3" to my 5'9", Princeton MBA to my Juilliard performance degree. He'd made $38 million last year through private equity deals, while I'd barely cleared $290,000. Your husband's quite accomplished in his field, Brandon said, at an uncomfortable dinner party, his hand resting just a moment too long on Sarah's bare shoulder. It must be absolutely fascinating living with a classical artist. The way he emphasized the word artist made it sound like a quaint hobby, something mildly amusing but ultimately irrelevant to serious people. Sarah laughed, a bright, genuine sound I hadn't heard from her in many months, and it made my chest physically tighten with anxiety. That conversation happened 7 months ago. The spring European tour was supposed to be a professional triumph. 3 weeks performing as guest soloist with the Vienna Philharmonic. Instead, it became the setting for my marriage's final movement. While I played Bach in the music vereen, Sarah was playing house in Brandon's penthouse. My nephew Kevin caught them in a compromising embrace that would permanently shatter everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and the woman who'd once claimed my music was all the wealth she'd ever need. The FaceTime call from my nephew Kevin came at 2:30 in the morning, Vienna time, while I was reviewing complex sheet music in my hotel room at the Imperial. His face filled my phone screen, pale and visibly anxious, looking much younger than his 24 years. Uncle David, I really need to tell you something important. His voice cracked like he was 14 again, calling me after his mother's funeral. I saw Aunt Sarah at Mr. Fletcher's office building tonight around midnight. She's redesigning his corporate office space too, I said, carefully setting down my violin. She mentioned expanding the project. It was literally midnight, Uncle David. The entire building was completely dark except for the penthouse level. They were out on the balcony together. He paused, struggling with the words. They were kissing. Like really kissing. Her dress was halfway unzipped. I'm so sorry. I took photos because I didn't think you'd believe me otherwise. The bow slipped from my fingers, clattering loudly against the metal music stand. What exactly did you see, Kevin? Everything. They were pressed against the glass railing. His hands were in her hair. The whole thing. I'm sending you the photos right now. The images arrived within seconds. Sarah pressed against Brandon's penthouse balcony railing, his hands tangled in her carefully styled hair, her expensive red dress half unzipped, the entire Chicago skyline glittering behind them like a mocking celebration of my complete humiliation. The timestamp clearly showed 11:43 p.m. when she'd texted me saying she was going to bed early because she had a terrible headache. I performed that night's scheduled concert perfectly, but mechanically, my fingers automatically knowing every note while my traumatized mind endlessly replayed those devastating images. The Austrian critics called my performance technically flawless, but emotionally hollow, which seemed brutally appropriate for a man discovering his entire life was an elaborate fraud. The confrontation finally came 4 days after I returned to Chicago. Sarah was in our kitchen humming Vivaldi's Four Seasons, wearing diamond earrings I'd definitely never seen before. Those are beautiful earrings, I said, deliberately setting down my violin case with exaggerated calm. She reflexively touched them. Thank you. They were a completion bonus from the Fletcher project. It must be quite some project, working past midnight and earning expensive jewelry as bonuses. Her face went through a rapid series of expressions like movements in a complex symphony, surprise, calculation, defiance, and finally, cold determination. You know, Kevin told you, didn't he? He works in Brandon's building, remember? Or did you conveniently forget about family while you were undressing for your wealthy client? She set down her coffee cup with remarkably steady hands. I wasn't going to insult your intelligence by denying it, David, but I'm not sorry it happened. Not even remotely sorry. How remarkably generous of you. She stood up, smoothing her designer skirt with perfectly manicured hands that used to tenderly trace my face after important performances. Do you have any idea what it's actually like being married to someone who loves dead composers more than living human beings? You spend 6 solid hours every single day with that violin, David. 6 hours. Brandon spends that time building actual empires, changing the world. I'm a professional musician. This is what I do. It's what you told me you loved about me. I was 28 years old. I thought passionate dedication to art meant passionate dedication to life. But you don't actually live, David. You just perform the same pieces over and over. Even our marriage became just another scheduled recital. The same movements repeated endlessly without variation. Brandon shows me completely new worlds. Last week we flew to Saint-Tropez for lunch. Just for lunch. When's the last time we went anywhere together that wasn't specifically for your work obligations? So you destroyed 23 years for lunch in Saint-Tropez? No. I destroyed it for someone who makes me feel genuinely alive for the first time in a decade. You want to know the real difference between you and Brandon? When he walks into any room, people immediately notice and pay attention. When you walk in, they might politely appreciate your technical talent, but nobody fears you. Nobody really needs you. Nobody's fundamental life changes because David Miller exists in the world, except yours. My income changed your life pretty dramatically, as I recall. She laughed, bitter and razor-sharp. Your income? Brandon makes your entire annual salary in less than a week. That house you're so proud of? His wine cellar alone is worth more. You're a museum piece, David. A relic playing music by dead men for dying audiences. The world moved on, and you're still standing on stage playing compositions by men who've been dead for centuries. The divorce attorney she'd hired was her father's golf partner and close friend. Naturally, Illinois law heavily favored the non-working spouse, especially one who claimed she'd sacrificed her promising career for the marriage. The papers were filed before I'd even fully processed what was actually happening. She wanted the house, half of all retirement accounts, substantial alimony that would financially cripple me, and maintenance of her established luxurious lifestyle. You'll keep your violin and one vehicle, her smug attorney said with fake generosity. Mrs. Miller is being extraordinarily reasonable under the circumstances. The Pentagon building rose from the Virginia landscape like a massive concrete fortress, its distinctive limestone walls gleaming in the early morning sunlight. I'd taken the overnight red-eye flight from Chicago, my grandfather's leather notebook wrapped carefully in a sweater inside my backpack, far too precious to trust to checked luggage. Captain Thomas Harrison met me at the main security checkpoint. He was considerably younger than his authoritative voice had suggested, maybe 47, with the kind of military posture that automatically makes you straighten your own spine. Mr. Miller, thank you for coming on such short notice. Before we proceed any further, I need to verify your identity beyond standard documentation. Tell me specifically about your grandfather's trumpet. It was a 1949 Bach Stradivarius, silver finish. He bought it from a pawn shop in Raleigh right after the war ended. There was a small dent on the bell from where the previous owner had dropped it. What did he call his regular performances at the Veterans Hospital? I smiled despite everything weighing on me. Sunday services for the godless. He used to say music was the only religion that never lied to anyone. Harrison nodded approvingly. Follow me, please. We descended 4 levels underground, passing through increasingly serious security checkpoints with armed guards and biometric scanners. Finally, we entered a completely windowless room with harsh fluorescent lights and a metal table holding several sealed file boxes. Your grandfather's actual complete service record, Harrison said, methodically opening the first box. What you're about to learn has been classified beyond top secret for exactly 60 years. Even now, certain operational details must remain permanently redacted. The photograph showed Henry, young and intensely alert in jungle camouflage fatigues, standing with a special operations unit whose faces were completely blacked out. Behind them, clearly visible wreckage of what appeared to be a small military aircraft. Operation Midnight Echo, April 1962. Your grandfather's unit was covertly inserted deep into Cambodia to investigate and secure a crashed Soviet reconnaissance aircraft. Officially, there were absolutely no Soviet personnel operating in Cambodia. Officially, American forces weren't there either. What did they actually find? The aircraft was carrying a prototype encryption system designed specifically for encoding nuclear launch authentication sequences. But that wasn't the real strategic prize. The pilot, a Soviet officer named Dmitry Volkov, had somehow survived the crash. He was dying from his injuries, but still conscious. Your grandfather spoke sufficient conversational Russian to communicate with him during his final hours. Harrison pulled out a heavily redacted intelligence transcript, still partially readable despite the black bars. Volkov understood he was dying. He gave your grandfather detailed information about numbered Swiss bank accounts being used to pay American double agents and operatives, complete account numbers, access authentication codes, everything. He showed me another grainy photograph. Henry holding what looked like a reinforced metal briefcase. Your grandfather memorized absolutely everything before officially turning over the briefcase to command. He knew those specific account numbers. Could have claimed that money literally any time over the next 40 years. $18 million in 1962 currency. Can you even imagine what that's worth today with compound interest? Why didn't he ever claim it? Because claiming it would have immediately exposed the entire operation. American and Allied intelligence lives would have been lost. Operational security would have been completely compromised. Your grandfather deliberately chose silence over personal wealth. But he meticulously documented everything in sophisticated code, hidden throughout his musical compositions. The Pentagon technically owed him substantial financial compensation for the mission, but he never claimed it. Said it would raise too many dangerous questions and endanger his family. And now the statutory classification period expired. The compensation, calculated with 60 years of compound interest and Defense Department liability adjustment multipliers for delayed payment, currently stands at $156 million, but your grandfather established very specific conditional requirements. Harrison handed me a sealed manila envelope, my name written in Henry's distinctive shaky handwriting from his final years. Inside, 4 pages filled with Henry's handwriting. David, if you're reading this letter, your marriage has ended completely and you've lost all your material possessions. I know this with certainty because behavioral patterns repeat consistently through generations. I recognized your father William's romantic nature clearly reflected in you. You love completely and without reservation, which inevitably means you can be hurt completely and without mercy. The music I left you contains far more than musical notes. Each composition carefully maps to geographic coordinates. Each tempo and rhythm change marks a specific number sequence. In Boston, Storage Facility Unit 673, paid in advance through 2095, you'll find what I couldn't destroy and couldn't claim during my lifetime. The Pentagon compensation money is yours regardless of any other choices. But claiming what's stored in Boston means consciously choosing truth over comfortable lies. The Swiss accounts still exist. The money technically laundered clean by time, but morally dirty in origin. Names are attached. Powerful families who built massive fortunes on war, profiteering, and treason. One particular name will matter to you very personally. You have exactly 72 hours from when Harrison called you. If you don't claim everything, it all automatically transfers to Defense Department general funds. If you do claim it, you'll have the power to correct terrible historical wrongs or preserve comfortable historical lies. Choose wisely. Music, like fundamental truth, resonates across time. Your loving grandfather, Henry. The Boston storage facility looked abandoned from the outside, its brick facade covered in decades of accumulated grime and spray-painted graffiti. But the electronic keypad at the main entrance worked flawlessly. I entered the code hidden in Henry's third movement of Autumn Reflections, 214-427-51. The mission date combined with his military service number. Unit 673 was located at the very end of a long hallway that smelled distinctly of rust and deteriorating paper. The lock turned smoothly despite its apparent age, and inside stood a single military green filing cabinet against the back wall. On top of it sat an antique chess set with pieces arranged mid-game, and I immediately recognized the specific position. It was the Queen's Gambit, the exact opening Henry had patiently taught me when I was 9 years old. Inside the cabinet's top drawer was another safety deposit box key, this one for Boston First Federal Bank. Beneath it, a thick leather portfolio containing documents that made my hands shake uncontrollably. Photocopies of Swiss bank statements dated 1962 through 1974, clearly showing regular deposits from American defense contractors to Soviet intelligence operatives. The amounts were absolutely staggering. but the company names were infinitely worse. Fletcher Defense Technologies appeared 31 times. Richard Fletcher, Brandon's grandfather, had systematically sold defective helicopter components to the American military while simultaneously channeling classified information and funding to Soviet operations in Southeast Asia. American helicopter pilots had died in preventable crashes caused by mechanical failures that Richard Fletcher knew about and deliberately ignored. The profit margin on those defective components, 41%. The blood money deposited in Swiss accounts, $18 million. My phone suddenly rang. Unknown number. Mr. Miller? The voice was disturbingly familiar but completely wrong. This is Brandon Fletcher. I understand you've been to Washington recently. How could you possibly know that? The same way I knew your wife was vulnerable to someone who could offer her significantly more than a struggling musician. The same way my family has always known about Henry Miller and what he took from that Cambodian jungle. We've been carefully monitoring your family for 60 years, waiting patiently for someone to claim what doesn't belong to them. Your grandfather was a war profiteer and traitor who eliminated American pilots. My grandfather was a pragmatic businessman who understood that war is simply another market with opportunities. Your grandfather was a thief who stole classified evidence that belonged to the government. He documented the truth. Truth is, whatever powerful people decide it is, Miller. Here's my offer. Take the Pentagon money and completely disappear. Leave Boston immediately. Leave those documents exactly where they are, and you'll be wealthy enough to never think about Sarah or me again, or continue down this path and discover what real loss actually looks like. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you the identical choice your grandfather faced. Silence and safety, or truth and devastating consequences. He intelligently chose silence. Be smarter than your current impulses. The line went dead. I stood in that dusty storage unit holding undeniable evidence of crimes that had built one of America's great family fortunes, and made my final decision. I called Robert, my cousin, who worked as an investigative journalist. Robert, clear your entire schedule. I have the story that will define your entire career. The Boston First Federal Bank vault opened with appropriate ceremonial slowness. Inside the safety deposit box were original documents of everything from the storage unit, plus reel-to-reel audio tapes labeled Volkov Final Confession, and detailed ledgers showing precisely where the Swiss money went after 1974. Brandon's father had inherited the accounts in 1987, then Brandon himself in 2019. But Henry had left one final surprise. At the bottom was sheet music titled Redemption Symphony. When I carefully hummed the melody, I realized it was musical encryption of current account access passwords. My grandfather hadn't just documented the crimes. He'd maintained complete access to the money. I spent the next 30 hours with Robert and a team of forensic accountants his newspaper brought in. The Swiss banks grudgingly confirmed the accounts were real and currently active. Total balance across all accounts, $79 million. Technically clean money now, but morally built on bones and blood. We publish tomorrow morning, Robert said. This will absolutely destroy Fletcher Defense Technologies and Sarah by extension. She's tied her entire future to Brandon. Are you having any second thoughts? I thought about Henry deliberately choosing silence to protect his family. Then I thought about the casualty lists. Young pilots barely 20 years old who died because Richard Fletcher chose profit over human lives. No second thoughts whatsoever. But we do this intelligently. We publish the historical documents first. Let the public naturally connect the dots to the present. And the Swiss money doesn't go to me. It goes into a trust for families of service members who died in helicopter crashes between 1962 and 1974. Every single penny. I'll have the Pentagon compensation. That's more than I ever imagined. The blood money goes back to the families it was stolen from. Robert smiled. Your grandfather would be incredibly proud. Maybe. Or maybe he'd think I was a complete fool for choosing truth over safety. What do you think he'd say? I looked at the sheet music one final time. Henry's patient notations. I think he'd say the music was worth playing, even if the audience wasn't ready to hear it. The Washington Post ran Robert's comprehensive story on a Tuesday morning with the headline, Blood Money, How Defense Contractor Fraud Funded Enemy Operations and Eliminated American Pilots. By noon, Fletcher Defense Technologies stock had dropped 42%. By market close, Brandon Fletcher was facing federal criminal investigation for inherited fraud, tax evasion on unreported foreign accounts, and potential treason charges. I watched the coverage from my new office, a converted brownstone where I'd established the Henry Miller Foundation for Military Families. The Pentagon money had cleared the previous week, all $156 million, completely clean and legal and mine. But I kept thinking about those crash investigation reports, the faces of 20-year-old pilots who never returned home because someone decided their lives were worth less than profit margins. Sarah called 19 times that first day. I finally answered on the 20th call. David, Brandon's been arrested. The FBI seized absolutely everything. The house, all the accounts, even my car because it was purchased with what they're calling proceeds of criminal enterprise. I literally have nothing. You have exactly what you chose, Sarah. Please. I made a terrible mistake. I see that clearly now. Brandon used me, just like his grandfather used those pilots. I'm staying with my sister in Naperville in her basement. Me, living in a basement. Sarah, what exactly do you want from me? I want to come home. That house isn't my home anymore. The bank foreclosed after Brandon's assets were frozen and you couldn't make the mortgage payments. I bought it at auction last month. My aunt and uncle live there now. They lost their place to medical bills. Seems like a much better use of the space than Brandon's Scotch library. She was crying now, ugly, desperate sobs that once would have completely broken me. What am I supposed to do? The same thing I did. Start over from nothing. The difference is you chose your ending. Mine was chosen for me. 6 months later, I performed at Orchestra Hall again, debuting my new composition, Redemption Symphony, the piece Henry had written but never performed publicly. The audience didn't know they were hearing encoded Swiss bank passwords transformed into melody, tragedy transformed into art. My mother, Elizabeth, sat in the front row, tears streaming during the slow movement that musically contained the names of every pilot who died in a Fletcher-supplied aircraft. The trust fund had already distributed $11 million to Gold Star families. Robert won a Pulitzer Prize for his investigation. Fletcher Defense Technologies declared bankruptcy. Brandon received 8 years in federal prison. Sarah married her divorce attorney 2 years later, a practical choice that probably suited her better than marrying for love ever had. My sister Jennifer asked me once if I regretted any of it. Which part, exposing Brandon or losing Sarah? Both. Either. You could have taken everything and stayed quiet. Henry did. Henry didn't have a choice. The world wasn't ready for the truth in 1962. He kept those secrets like seeds waiting for the right season. I just happened to be the gardener who inherited his soil. I still live modestly, a 2-bedroom condo near Orchestra Hall. I still practice 6 hours daily, but now I also teach free music lessons to veterans' children every weekend. The foundation has expanded to include music therapy programs at VA hospitals. Sometimes I play in nursing homes like Henry did, always ending with moonlight variations in his modified rhythm. Occasionally, an old veteran looks up sharply, recognizing the embedded Morse code pattern. Midnight Echo, one whispered once. You know about Midnight Echo? My grandfather knew, I told him. He made sure someone would remember. The truth about inheritance is that it's never really about money. It's about the stories we carry, the choices we make with what we're given, and the courage to play difficult passages, even when our fingers shake. Henry left me proof that patient justice might take 60 years, but it does arrive, encoded in the rhythm of time itself, waiting for someone to finally play the right notes in the right order at the right moment. And that moment was worth everything I lost to find it.